evening and welcome to the Langley Adams Library, folks. Thanks for coming in on this nice night. Tonight we have Joseph Gallo Jr. here, who has written Boston, Bronze and Stone Speak to Us. It's a beautiful book. But I wanted to tell you about a couple other programs that we'll be having in the next few days. Tomorrow we will be having a movie. It's Rick Seaback's Unusual Buildings and Other Roadside Stuff. That will be at 3:30, and that's for an hour. It's a PBS program. Excuse me. And on Wednesday, we will have Super Sleuths at 4 p.m., and that will be about whales with Miss Lauren. And that's all I'm going to say. So, here is Joseph Gallo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the Langley Adams Library for inviting me here. I've done a number of talks for quite a few libraries, the whole Boston library system. I've been asked to give these talks on this book that I wrote in the State House, Old North Church, women's groups, Rotary groups, schools in Lexington, and also UMass, which I'll be giving some talks. I've given seminars in Beacon Hill. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because when I wrote this, I was living in Boston proper, as I was telling some people here, right on the wharfs and in the North End. And what had happened is that I would walk through Boston. Boston is a very walkable city. And as I was walking through, I love sculpture, and I noticed a lot of sculptures. And I found myself taking dozens and dozens of photos of the sculptures. And three of the things that I noticed is one, there was a lot of them. Two, they were of high quality, museum quality that you would find in, the Museum of Fine Arts or a Metropolitan Museum or any other museum in Europe that I had been to, with the Louvre, and they were out in the public, so in public places. And the third thing I found out too is that they were in pristine condition. Now I said, why is that important? Because what I found was I wanted to find out more, so I went to the Boston Public Library, and I looked for books. And I had to go to the research library, the real book library, and I got some of these. And eventually I bought each one of these. These here cost $75 each, but don't worry, my book is extremely reduced. It's only 10 because I just had a second printing and I got it really inexpensive. It went from 30 to 20 on our website and also in Amazon down to 10. And the reason is because I got it overseas and there was kind of a demand for it. So, and the reason why there was a demand is that the media got involved in this, which I'll explain. These books here were both subsidized by State Street Trust Company, and they were done by scholars, Forbes and Eastman. And you can see they probably wouldn't be so exciting, and they weren't really big hits, but this is the best you can have. And you can see on this title here, Some Statues of Boston. And then the next exciting book would be called Other Statues of Boston. So you can tell. So what would happen if you look at this, okay, if you look at them, they're in black and white, but if you look real close, you can see a lot of the monuments and the plinths, which are the granite or sandstone or marble footings that they're on. The plinths and also the bronze statue, the Carrara marble statue or the granite statue was either marred in some way from graffiti. It might have been damaged. Some of them were stolen. You'll see some of the earlier ones that I took 6 years ago, because this took me about 5 years to put this together. And by the way, I was asked when I was into the Rare Book Library, says this is all they had, and they said, Joe, why don't you actually write one? And I had no idea until I developed a passion for this, to really felt that I really needed to. I think the amount of monuments, the quality monuments, and the quality sculptors and sculptresses of these monuments in Boston really need to be heard. So that's why I entitled it Boston Bronze and Stone speak to us, because the monuments do speak to us. And what I'm just going to say now before I get in is that's why I wrote the book. I felt there was a need, and I felt that as you see, some of the sculptures needed to be, I think, recognized, and I think to be exposed to the public. And also, I wrote the book to make it a little bit better than this. The book has important features, and the book has maps so that when you go into Boston as a religious group, an ethnic group, whether you're Irish, Italian, Afro-American, Armenian, Jewish, if you're in a Rotary group, a women's group, as I said, which I've spoken to, or a revolutionary colonial group, historical group, you tend to go in there and you're just overwhelmed and you really don't know how to be directed. This book directs you. So this book is not only a pretty book, it's a coffee table book, it is a book that will guide you. It's a guidebook through Boston, immediate neighborhoods of Boston, particularly 18 neighborhoods, and it's about approximately 200 monuments. It's still not all of them. Since I wrote the book, and people want me to do a second edition, not a second printing, but there's been another dozen more monuments. Monuments like to other new heroes that have been recognized for various reasons because of their sports, their leadership qualities, or whatever. So people like Tony DeMarco in the North End, who is a leader or a hero for the Italian ethnic group. There's Bill Russell during my time that just put up, just a few months ago, the Armenian Monument, which is a $6 million monument and park right in, right in the center of the Rose Kennedy Parkway. So we have a lot more. Kalya Skremski. So you have sports figures and all kinds of leaders. So now the last item I want to mention before I get into some of these monuments, and I'm not going to do all of them, but I will mention, I will go into some of these in detail. I have given us seminar courses in Beacon Hill to get into more detail, because these people live in this area, and they wanted to know more about it. Is the fact that the media got a hold of this, and they wanted to know more. And I'll tell you the reasons why the media got into this. And what I mean by the media, the local newspapers in the Boston area, the North Shore area, interviewed me and wanted to know why I wrote the book. How did I write the book? And they were fascinated, because the underlying reasoning is this book, unlike these books here, you can see the cover. You can judge by the cover. They're single focused on this one here. It's George Washington, and it was more colonial, military history leaders, political history leaders. The monuments were dedicated to, and then later on to Lincoln, with Archer, the slave Archer Alexander, for the Civil War. What you're going to see here in this book, I'll put the lights out here. What you're going to see in this book is, first of all, it's not black and white. It's colored. So originally, that's why the book was, when I first did for other printing, you had to sell them in order to break even or make a little profit. To cover the expenses would have been about $40 or $50. But we got it down because I found printers internationally who wanted to do this and would help me do this. So first of all, it's colored. Okay. Second of all, we could just go back to that first one. I just want to mention that you can judge the book by the cover, because unlike the single focus, you see the 6 photos here, and we're taking all aspects of life. Boston was settled in 1630 by John Winthrop and 1,000 of his followers who came here, called Puritans. It was much different than the Pilgrims in 1620. A much more successful group, and way more successful than Jamestown in 1607, which was a hellhole because the more people that would come into there for various reasons in the Chesapeake area is because of the malaria, the dysentery, yellow fever, and whatever other diseases that they had there, as well as Indian problems and mutinies, and it was a lot of death. So the more people came, the more they were dying. So they had more of a loss. Whereas in New England, we had a population explosion. So there's another big difference. But this book will indicate, we have K.L. Weems, this probably know where this is, the Dolphins. It's a bronze in front of the aquarium. Again, showing woman sculptors, which was really big, and this is big for the United States because we didn't have them at that time. As a matter of fact, you'll see we didn't have any sculptors until the mid to late 1800s. A lot of the sculptures were made in Florence, Rome, or Paris, and then they were shipped here. This here is Paul Revere by Cyrus E. Dallin, who also did this, The Appeal to the Great Spirit. And again, when I took this at that time, that was, it's all oxidized, and you'll see some of these other ones. These here are in excellent condition, but I left some there especially so that you can see the condition, like John Glover, General John Glover from Marblehead, who was one of George Washington's right-hand man. You'll see his monument. But you can see these are all in pristine condition. Now, that has a meaning. You see, this here is by Delu. It's made directly from Italy. It's a 7 ton monument, and you can see it's right in front of Prudential. That was signaling for Boston the new financial insurance, white-collar office financial district that was coming from there all the way down to where we have our financial district now down in Federal Street, Post Office Square. So that was a precursor. So monuments can be an indicator or a precursor of what's going to happen or what happened. This here is Arthur Fiedler. I don't know if you remember him, but he was the head of not the Boston Symphony, but the Boston Pops. And he was very impressive. He democratized the classical music for all of us. And that's what I tried to do with the book, is to democratize and to bring out to the public. That's why the media, with the small newspapers, and then in turn, the Boston Globe had a Sunday article on it, and we sold hundreds and hundreds of books. And then they captured it, and then Jordan Rich on the radio got it. Again, you know, for public radio at night, expanded that whole audience. We got calls. And then finally, we were on Chronicle a number of times, repeated 3 or 4 times, and every time we would sell hundreds of books. Then the bookstores wanted, then people wanted me to give these talks, so we sold more books. Again, and I'll keep mentioning the diversity of people who want this. This reflects, I think, the ultimate goal of America, which is the democratization in the sculptures, but in the meaning of the sculptures to reflect the people's values, whether they're ethnic values, religious values. So what we have here, down here is this woman here is Phyllis Wheatley, and this is in the 1700s. Anybody know who she is? Any idea? Well, yes. Yes, that's great. Do you,
Cool.
we'll be showing her poems, and she was
Where is she?
this, you'll see this, we're going to be spending some time on it. It's called the Woman's Monument by Meredith Bergman, who was right in Commonwealth Ave. It's a beautiful piece, and you know, your daughter's right. This is a beautiful new piece that has been refurbished again, but by Meredith Bergman. And I happen to have her sister, when I did the I think it was a Boston Public Library talk, and she said she was talking to us. You know, this monument is very different because it has Abigail Adams in it, you'll see, and it also has Lucy Stone, the suffragette, who preceded Susan B. Anthony. So what we have here, her name is Phyllis, which was named after the slave ship that she came on. She was only 13. And then the Wheatley family on Beacon Hill who adopted her. They realized afterwards she was a genius. She was a female prodigy, and as in her 20s and 30s, she wrote these poetical works. Now, what's so interesting is that she's not only black, but she's a woman, and she published. She did not publish in the United States. This was like a miracle. So none of the white aristocrats, you know, in Cambridge or Harvard or Yale could believe that she did it. So she had to get this done, published in London, and be brought back here. So this is the kind of reason why we have these monuments, to wow you and to open your mind, so they're speaking to us in different ways. And again, this one here is our second governor. He was only 22 to 24 years old, only for 8 months. This is done by McMoney's, and he was a sculptor. And this can be found in the vestibule, the entryway of the old entranceway of the Boston Public Library, not in the new section. And this here he was sent away because of his religious beliefs, and we'll get into that with the antimonian controversy. But we can go on each one of these. Again, this is Cyrus E. Dallon's Appeal to the Spirit. This is Cyrus E. Dallon, people don't realize, he did Paul Revere and he did Anne Hutchinson. And what it is that what he did was that he was from Utah and understood the Indian community. So he did these monuments to share, and what they're showing here is he's looking up, and he's looking to the Great Spirit, because the Indians had a belief in nature and cosmology, and they blended in. But that gives you an idea.
Where is that one?
This one here, this is directly in front on Huntington Street, in front of the Museum of Fine Arts. Okay, it's a world-class, and I'm just picking out a few here. These are world-class monuments done by world-class sculptors, and you don't have to pay a fee. You can sit on them. You can take a picture with them, and I'll be showing you how difficult it was for the Boston Globe to take a picture with me, and Chronicle to take a picture of me with some of these monuments, because the kids and the families from all over, out of state, anywhere in the country, as well as from Europe, South America, would be near them, and I couldn't get near them. That's how popular, and I'm going to try to show you the stories and the feelings. Okay, we're going to start getting going, but this is the introduction in Boston, the immigrant way. This is when Ray Flynn was our mayor. America's Promise has drawn people from the corners of the world to Boston in search of a better life for themselves and the families. Their traditions and values become a fabric of our neighborhood. Perfect example of that is Chinatown, the North End. The North End, okay, was originally English. Okay, then it became, there's a timeline in my book, and you can see it on Hanover Street in bronze. It was first, of course, Indians, Native Indians, then there was the English, and then after that, people don't realize there was a huge Jewish community with 6 synagogues, okay? Your Rap family that started this Stop and Shop came from there, and your Filene's Basement people. So, you know, we have important people from this group. They immediately left after 20 years or 30 years. They broke out quick. They were somewhat educated, they were business oriented. They weren't like the next group, who was the Irish group, who weren't, and they were poor, devastated, and they were running, okay, from their oppression. And that's what it was, oppression. It really wasn't any, you know, potato famine. What it was is the English were taking their food, okay, for their country and for their people, leaving these people starving. This is what happens. It happens now, you know, a lot. You see it in other world countries, if it's in Africa or if it's in the Mideast. This is what happened. One group dominating another. But they came here. And then the Italians took over after as we'll see, as the Irish became an integral part of our community, a big part of this country. Leadership qualities, money, educators, leaders of all sorts. The next group of poor people came in was the Italians. And after that now, I was talking to our librarian here in the sense that it's become only 38% of Italians. Now, who are you getting? You're getting the East Bloc countries. You're getting Romanian kids. You're getting the hard workers. You're getting South American kids, Argentinians, Brazilians, Bolivians. okay, Venezuelans, and now we haven't felt it, but the Central American people who are literally running for their life because of the corruption, the drug trade, and all the corruption, the killings, the murderings that are going in South America, people don't realize, from Guatemala and Costa Rica and Mexico. So these problems are still with us, these immigration problems. Okay, I'm going to go through this a little quick. One of the features is the map. We have 18 maps. This map here is Boston Common. This Boston Common immediately tells you a couple of things. I put this map in. Here's Charles Street. Here's Tremont Street, so you can get your bearings. Over here is Beacon Hill. Up here, Beacon Street and Beacon Hill is up here. Okay, a lot of Bullfinch homes, and of course right up here is your Bullfinch State House with loads of monuments. This map indicates about a dozen monuments. Primarily, this is America's first commonly held property, and this was established by the agreement between Blackstone, Reverend Blackstone, who made an agreement with John Winthrop that this had to be used in common, and it was a pasture land. So when we look here, we see all these monuments, and with these stars represents a monument. Inside the star is a number of the page that you can find a snippet of information about that monument. So if you don't know what you're looking at, and there's no inscriptions on there, there's no stories on there, I've done the research. And that's why it took 5 years to pull this together. This is just one small example. And this, at that time, was done 60 years ago. It is much cleaned up. This is a Marquis de Lafayette. People don't realize this section of Tremont Street is dedicated to this Frenchman. Why? You hear people, the French are rude and everything else. If it wasn't for this man alone, as well as other French, the French forces, who finally Ben Franklin brought over, the cannon, the ships, the military men, he was first here. He came here of his own volition, gave us $2 million when $2 million was worth it, and bought the clothes for the backs of the people, of our men, our revolutionary soldiers in places like Valley Forge, where our Second Continental Congress, through corruptions and negligence, weren't able to fulfill those needs. This man is honored and has the honorary medal. Came here, fought, and was so well loved. He was invited back, you can barely see it, 1824, 15 years later. He was invited back, paid back in full with interest, and demanded and asked to go to every state of the Union. At that time it wasn't 13, it was 15, because Kentucky and Vermont came in. He went for 2 years and came back, in every state and city there was a militia waiting for him, shooting guns, parties, balls in his favor. This is an amazing man. So this small plaque is put here, and this is done by John F. Paramino. And the only other one I'm going to spend some time is done by a German. His name is really Adolf Robert Krauss. This is a beautiful monument, just to show you how you can have a seminar on these monuments and show you the workmanship. This has been all redone. This is a combination of bronze as well as granite. Robert Krauss did this in 1888. Again, most of your monuments, and this I'm sure was done in Europe, we did not have the educated sculptors. We did not have manufacturing as to the point we were just getting this. We're going into the Industrial Revolution. But a lot of these artists and the ways to build these monuments was done in Europe. So what had happened here, if you look at this is Lady Liberty holding up a chain to break, and this is a theme you'll see throughout all the other monuments, to break the slavery that we had to break away from, not the king of England, because as British Americans we loved the colonists, our king, but what we really hated was the Parliament. It's much like our Senate today and our Congress. People are upset because for various reasons, I don't know, maybe, I don't know about our Congress, but at that time they were corrupt, they were putting people in that, that they knew. They had lobbyists, and they were not listening to the people. They were listening to the very wealthy landed class called aristocrats. Okay? So Also, we weren't getting represented in any of our needs. So that's where you get the taxation without representation. She is Lady Liberty. On top of her head, you can't see it, there's a little cap. That cap is an old Roman symbol that when you had a slave and you freed that slave badge of freedom was a cap. So that's used through the Netherlands, throughout history in Europe, and right out through America. So you have your cap symbol, you have Lady Liberty, and you have her looking upwards, looking at that, but crushing the crown and the Parliament down here. This is if you go up to it, this is a beautifully sculptured thing. We're going to get a close-up. But this here, right here, again, this is done by Kraus, a German craftsman. And this is our American eagle ready to take off. The country's ready to take off. The other symbols here, we're going to, okay, next, you get a close-up view. Look at the gossamer. You can see through this gossamer thing. Look at the detail in here. This is, like I said, you can go up here. And then above here are the names. Crispus Attucks, that's the first man who was killed, who happened to be a black mulatto. And that was put up there because at this time, late in the 1800s, we had a black community, okay, where the slaves were freed, and we have a black community who wanted to participate in the American dream, the American government. So they want this man to be up there so they can show we're part of America too. Whenever you have rebellions and you have people burning stores or destroying cities, it's because it's a revolt, okay, a rebellion, because their needs are not being answered. Those needs are stopped when these riots stop, when they're part of the government, okay? When they start having to say, let me tell you something, okay, what's going on in Ferguson is no different than what the Irish did to the military in the North End, okay? And the Italians had their revolts. So even the Jewish mothers had the kosher meat revolts in the North End. So there's a good book out there, if you love American history, if you love Boston, it's called Boston Riots. There's approximately 147 riots in the city of Boston. Boston is the most riotous town in the United States. It makes Philadelphia and New York and Dodge City look sick, okay? There's been so many, fights and revolts all the way up until the 70s, until recently. So, but this here is done by Paul Revere, the lithographer, but this is done at the bottom. This is a high relief bottom of this monument you saw. So again, this is a complicated monument telling you stories, okay, about the American Revolution. This happens to be a distorted story because what we see here is Captain Preston here. What is it? Looks like he's telling his men, his 8 men, to fire upon this British colonial crowd called Americans, the British, in front of the State House that we have today, and you can see the symbols, the unicorn and of the king, okay, King Charles, and that was called King Street. It's called State Street. And as a result, this is a high relief showing these 5 men that we saw listed up there, Crispus Attucks, and then it goes, and it was 3 American English, and then it was an important one, Samuel Patrick Cobb, who was the Irishman. He died last. He was the one who told John Adams, who was representing these English soldiers to defend them, because they were defending themselves. He had enough guts, John Adams, who was told by his cousin Sam Adams to represent it. Nobody in New England would represent these people because they hated these lobsterbacks so much. But he did, to show them that we were men of laws. But what was so important is that when this man died, this is Crispus Attucks, and right here is dying, you can touch his hand, and Crispus Attucks, his foot is down here, you can touch his foot, and you'll see their hands and their foot are all worn because everybody wants to touch him. It's like when you go into the Vatican, you touch St. Peter's foot, for luck and good fortune. These are the heroes that died. He died, but he explained to the court after he died in 5 or 7 days, and to John Adams, that it wasn't the soldiers. They were pelted, they were pushed, they were pelted with stones, snowballs, and ice. And as a matter of fact, Preston, okay, was in front here trying to stop them. So this is called propaganda at its best, but it worked because you got through. So now this is another monument that tells a lot of stories, but this is about Civil War. We're still, people are still in Boston Common. This is on Flagstaff Hill. And again, Lady Liberty, again with the flag, northeast, south. Monuments here represented by the muses, the women, of all four spheres of the influence of war, okay, during the Civil War. It was a major war and major casualties. But the soldiers and sailors was done by Martin Milmore, who was a student of Thomas Ball, who was in Charlestown. Again, and this man here, Martin Milmore, you'll see was the tutor or the mentor of Daniel Chester French. You probably know him. Well, a lot of monuments in Boston, but the big one is does anybody know the big one in Washington, D.C. that is world famous for, as well as many other ones? It's the Lincoln Monument. He's the guy who did it. You know, this town has great, Boston and Boston area has great resource of artistic, technological, and intellectual geniuses. Now, this is the most recent picture. It's a poor one because I took this when I was looking. This the 12th night was going on just last week. And you say, well, why did you take this? Because I'm going to show you close-ups that you can't see this. I'm sorry. This is why it took me 4 or 5 years, or 5, 6 years to take pictures, because it's the most difficult thing to take pictures of these monuments at different times of the year. There's snow, there's people, there's leaves, there's branches. I took it this night, and the lighting wasn't good, but this is the soldier. You say, why is this important? Well, for decades, this soldier, and the next one, the Union soldier, this sailor, okay, these are works of art. These are 8 feet bronze, done by Martin Milmore. You can't, if you go into a museum, they're priceless, okay? And again, there's a little story here we can't get in. Next, right here is peace, represented by a woman, and there's the lead, and there's the other woman representing history. So you've got to learn from your history so you don't have these wars. Just like we have a Holocaust monument, okay, right in Boston, right next door to the City Hall. I don't have it here because when you walk in, it's a horrible feeling, eerie feeling. It has 6 million numbers inscribed on it. So when you walk on, the shadows come on and you have all these tattoos and these numbers, which they did to people, and then you have the flame underneath, and which simulates the flame and the gases, and of course you're in chimneys because they all went up in smoke. Now, why do they do these things? To deter people from not doing these things, like it's going on with the Sunnis and the Shiites, machine gunning tens of thousands of people. This is why the United States, as of yesterday and a few days ago, is teaming up with Iraq, Iran, and the Kurds to crush these people, because they're killing and making troughs and throwing these people in, like we did here. So why am I saying this? Because there's another monument, which I don't have in my book. It's about Armenians in 1915, and there's always a ceremony every year with these Armenian people, okay, in Rose Kennedy Parkway, okay, telling you the story of how their people, by the Turks, which are our allies, okay, and this is the only city in the United States will accept this Armenian monument, because Boston is a very liberal and open city, as you can see, as some other cities like New York, accepting all religions and all ethnic groups, is that in 1915, people don't realize 1.5 million of those Armenians, which are human beings, were driven off their land, the land was taken, or they were killed and slaughtered. They ran to America. So they thank America, okay, to establish that they can celebrate their ethnicity and their religions, and they built this as a monument for America or whatever. This is another new monument, late 1800s. It's called the Brewster Fountain, which was a private fountain, on Boston Public Garden on Park Street by this multimillionaire who bought it, and there's only 4 of them. He bought this at the Paris World Fair. And I'm telling you these reasons because to show, one, his wealth and his culture. This is made by Leonard, and was a Frenchman, and this is a copy of the original one in Paris, and then there's another one that a Pasha has in Egypt, and then I believe there's another one in the Bordeaux area. So what I'm saying is, he got this is a bronze, and this shows the classical influence of the gods of the water. You have Zeus, Isis, his wife, and you have nymphs. I'm showing you this because this is one of the many fountains in Boston that works. They all work, between Mayor White and between Mayor Menino. 16 years in service and 20 years, and hopefully I think Welch is a replicant of them, loves their city, and has kept it up. When you keep your monuments up, you bring people in. I live there, there's tens of thousands of people who come in there every week to see this beautiful city and the depth of the 400-year history that this city has in places like New York don't have, or Philadelphia, or the Chesapeake Bay area. This here is Edward A. Filines by George Ahrens. Why? This is on the Boston Column. We're still in the Boston Column, so I'm going to start getting really fast. He was a Prussian Jew who was accepted to Harvard. He couldn't go. Okay, his father needed him, and so what he did, and a lot of people say, do you know what he's famous for? Does anybody know what he's famous for? Edward Filines. I don't know if you can remember. You know Filene's Basement? A lot of people say that first, but what he's really famous for is the fact that, and I don't know if you understand what's going on with the Mullis, okay, situation with the brothers and everything else, but what he had was he was the first to take care of his people. He did not need the AFL-CIO. He had a company union. What this man did is instill a 40-hour work week when they didn't have that. He gave women's rights good wages. He gave them, okay, in their company, not him, the company, he made sure, gave them vacation pay, medical pay. The most important thing, okay, what he did was establish the first credit unions because banks were going out left and right. They were not insured or guaranteed by the federal government. This man started with company credit unions. So when those poor people worked and they were illiterate, just like my grandparents were, they would keep their checks and they didn't know where to cash them or where to put them, okay? And then you had people, have you ever heard of the word Ponzi? Okay, you know who that was? That was a real guy. He was a great Bostonian. He was an Italian, only an Italian. He made Madoff, okay, Bernie Madoff look like a kidney guy. He had so many people swindled. The fire department, the police department, the news, millions and millions of dollars. He lived he was a celebrity. Hanover Street. He was the best. He was the best. And he was a star. But that's why we had to have those things to protect him. This is another monument, founder's monument, John F. Paramino, who's from the North End, a good friend. He was a sculptor of Mayor Curley. The Italian, the Irish, they worked together. And what they did is a 300-year monument dedicated to an Englishman, people who first came here, the Puritans. This man here is John Winford. This is Dr. Wilson, and this is Mary Pollard, one of the first women in Boston, probably the first woman to set foot. This man here is Reverend Blackston. Now, he's giving the city of Boston, the town of Boston, a shaman to him. You said, well, what the hell is this guy doing here before him? Well, because he came over here with the Pilgrims, and they broke off. What happened in England and in America is there was constant breaking off of religions because interpretation of the Bible, or the liturgy, or the episcopology, and whatever you can imagine, there was all these things. But he was living with the Indians, and there's the Indians right here. And that face is Mayor Curley's face, because we don't know. He put his face in there so we can all remember, you know? So, you know, he had a lot of ego. But this is a beautiful monument. There's a nice statement in the back. I'm just going to move a little quicker. Go ahead. That's right on We're still on Boston Common, and we're still on Boston Common, but we're on Beacon Street. Does anybody know what this
Cool.
this is Robert Gouldshaw, but what movie this created and still, huh? Glory. And the reason
Glory. Oh, yeah.
Glory, okay. And what happened is, this is Robert Gouldshaw, he's white, everybody else here is black. And what's so important, this is the first regiment, this is the famous 54th Regiment that was slaughtered, about 40 and 50%, including him. Again, ditch digging, they threw all the blacks in the white, like animals, like you do with cattle when they're infected. That's what they did to them. And what's so interesting is that this Irishman, Augustin Gaudens, who influenced many other, if you look at the book, and that's another thing my book has, is a bibliography, so you can have some more books to read. Also, it's footnoted where it comes from, and the other issue is that we have a list, an index of sculptors, and an index of sculptures. So it's got an introduction, it's got a preface. It's not like these books. So we try to make this as academic and as maneuverable and user-friendly as possible. Now, a couple of things I just want to mention artistically for sculpture. If you love sculpture, there's a trick here that he uses for movement. How do you know that these people, this is a moving, incredibly huge monument facing, Bullfinch's State House. Right? And this is the story that this group of men walked right up Beacon Street. This is the 1st Regiment, and used them. Lincoln and other people knew there was 158,000 blacks who wanted to fight, and they needed them to fight the General Lee's forces, because General Lee's forces were smaller. But if you know anything about America, the best fighters, and many times, are from down south and in the back country of Kentucky, Tennessee, Missouri. There's reasons for that if you study your books. So get back to here. Anybody know why this is? Looks like there's a movement. Can you see movement marching? Can you hear the marching? Can you hear the drummer right here? Give me. There's a movement here. It's an old trick. Okay, based from an Italian. It's called Apollo Belvedere, which I actually saw. It was dug up in the late 1400s in Rome, and I believe it was Greek or Roman statue. And what it was is Belvedere, and if you've ever seen this, he has a bow and an arrow, and he's completely naked. He has a cloth over him, and he has his sandals on, and he has his his little container of arrows, and he had just gotten through, shooting the Pythion in front of Delphi. It's just a story, a Roman and Greek story. Now, if you look at my heel is up. It indicates an after movement. And what they did here, the same technique that was taken here, and in Daniel Chester's French. If you ever gone to Concord, the Minuteman. Minuteman. The biggest problem with the Minuteman is the Minuteman means action. He has to be ready in a minute. I tell this to the kids in Lexington. It's different from militia. Militia were fighters and everything. Minuteman was only established for that one attack. They knew this was going to happen. They had to defend all the guns and munitions in Connecticut, Concord, and Lexington. And the Minutemen had to get ready and leave their plows within a minute's notice. And they had to assemble, and they had to get their guns cocked and loaded and ready to fire in formation. That's why they ran to the bridge. When they were getting slaughtered at Lexington, the Minutemen weren't there. That was militia. They were ready. That's what turned back the lost the backs or the soldiers. Oh my gosh. Okay, and so as I'm saying, the trick was the foot. The most important thing Daniel Chester French did that made him look alive and ready. If you look at the Minuteman, if you look, go on your internet, that heel is up. He's ready to go. He's ready to pounce. He's ready to move. After that battle, they were dissolved. Okay? So they were an elite group. This here, I gave a talk with David Phillips. We're in Boston Common, and I'm trying to show you how Boston Common has evolved. This, they're 3-footers. What do you think he did this for? There's a couple of reasons, real quick. Guy's a genius. He looks just like you. He has a beard, highly intelligent guy, and he looks good, and he's just a genius. He's done so many things, but he does a lot of things for kids. And what it is, you'll see kids climbing all over this. This is Frog the Thinker. This is Frog the Fisherman. He has his little worms. And there's 5 or 6 other frogs in the back where all the playground is. There's scuba diving frog, the swimming frog, this frog gate, the swinging frog, this frog. All these frogs, because he wants the kids to get involved and touch these sculptures. This is not like in museums. These are world-class. He did this for another reason, because at one time, this had many frogs. Indians lived here, and there was frogs, snails, and mollusks, and that's what the Indians did. As a matter of fact, this was the end point of Charles River, because the Back Bay wasn't there, as you'll see, and the Boston Gardens weren't there. That was all underwater. This is no longer there. Anybody know what this is? It's called the Partisans. It's by Andres. But he was a Californian Polish sculptor. He did this, Partisans, and you can see it's kind of depressing. It's because he gave this to Boston only for 6 months. He was there for 25 years. All these people back here called the Beacon Hill crowd, the Brahmins, didn't want this here. First of all, it was dangerous because there was no plinth. It was just sitting on the grass. And people were getting cut because there's very sharp edges. But it was made that way. And the reason it's depressing is because the Polish people were always fighting against people who were trying to take them over. If it wasn't their own aristocracy, it was the Russian Tsar. If it wasn't the Russian Tsar, it was the Nazis. If it wasn't the Nazis, it was the communist Russians. So he felt that they were patriots. But these people didn't, and they didn't want this here. It wasn't American enough. Okay, I got a couple of pages on there, how it was moved. We still have it in the city, in the proper place, in the Polish-Irish area where it's on Summer Street, going into the Grand, where they have all the functions there, the conventions. It's on the pier. Commonwealth. I'll think about it for a minute. This is another example right here of a map, the stars indicating how many monuments and plaques, and then in the stars where you can find it in the book. So if you're ever going with a religious group or a Boy Scout group, which has happened, historical group, a family group, your own family or extended family, you can take the book and you can digest Boston. You can take 2 or 3 of these sections and come back again and know what you've done. You won't be overwhelmed with 18 neighborhoods. People, I did not go into Charlestown. I did not go into Brookline. I did not go into Roxbury. I did not go into East Boston. Okay, I did not do this, and I did not go into Cambridge. There's a Harvard, there's a Harvard monument. There's other monuments there. I couldn't do it because there's so many hundreds in here. This man here is one of my heroes. I'm wondering why the color is not coming out. Because these are supposed to be colorful. And
It's a beautiful color on the computer, but
I know,
it's not
for some
showing.
reason. That's why I have to take my my equipment. I think it'll be better. But that, if we go back just one minute, he's my hero. This is Horace Mann by Miss Emma Stevens, a Beacon Hill sculptress. Again, this is revolutionary. This is amazing. She did him in Gobs here, classical Gobs course. This was done in Europe. And she did this to celebrate this great man who was Secretary of State and the Secretary of Education and a representative in our Massachusetts which is in front of the State House. We're in front of the State House. And what this is, he developed the normal schools. It was him who wanted to have public education. This rippled effect in every state of the Union. And you'll see in one of our other monuments, we get to it, he even affected Argentina, and so that we can have the public education. Without public education, you cannot have a democracy, because ignorance is what kills the democracies. You have to have an educated republic, or a public republic or democracy, to read papers, to read books, to understand what's going on. This is one of the major generals from, this is Daniel Chester French, who did this man here called Joseph Hooker, a general who fought against Henry E. Lee, and who was the best general of all, and that's why he had a superior force and he couldn't beat him. That's why they needed more supplies, cannon, and people, because these people were fighters. They were tough fighters. And this one here is done by Cyrus E. Dallin, and same person who did, as we'll see later, the Paul Revere statue. But this is the first woman who was in you should read the book called Anne Hutchinson, by her great-great-granddaughter, a Chicago University genius called LaPlante. And she writes about how this woman had 14 kids, was a midwife, knew her, she was a herbalist, and helped women with all kinds of illnesses. But by her looking up, she was different than the Puritans. She was a Puritan, but she didn't want the help of a minister. She did not believe in certain parts of the scripture, but she believed in the Spirit coming to her directly. Okay, later this is called Quakerism. Okay, where you don't need any kind of hierarchical clergy. Well, you can imagine what happened. You know, John Winthrop and 8 of his secular leaders in Cambridge and Boston, and then the 8 clergy, John Cotton and a lot of other people, put her in front of a court 8 hours straight until she dropped, asking her questions, and asked her to come again. And this is the night before, when she was bringing a baby through, helping a baby through life and through midwifery. So she was later banned, and she actually helped start Rhode Island, because Rhode Island was much more freer in their beliefs, religious beliefs. They accepted Quakers and other peoples, Anglicans. And this was her friend, the best friend, who went with her. She was a Quaker. Unfortunately, she was a really strong believer and in her beliefs. And she believed so much that she believed that she had to resist. These are women. If you look at the dates, 1959, these are the last who were respected, and women's groups put these in, okay? It's like black groups, it's like Vietnamese groups, it's like, you know, all kinds of groups. They come in, and they come in much later because they respect themselves, and they put monuments to them. But what this represents, besides her, you know, is that she was a Quaker, and you know, if you know anything about Quakers, they sit in meeting houses, and they sit there until one of them gets inspired to speak. There's no leader, okay? So she's there peacefully, and you know they do not do any violence. They will not lay a hand on anyone, use a gun. She came back 3 times, and our governor at that time, John Endicott, said to banished her, "We don't want you here." She came back again, crossing the Boston Common. He whipped her, had her stripped for the top, and whipped her, had her whipped in public, sent her back, under guards, not to speak to anybody, because of her beliefs would infect other men and women and the Puritans. So, and this was Puritan belief. She came back the second time, cut off her ears, set her back. She came back a 3rd time with 3 other men, and he had warned her each time that he would be hung. She was hung in Boston Common on a tree, from a tree, in 1660. At that time, that's when the King of England said, enough is enough. You're not going to have a Puritan theocracy or state, but the general court, and having people coming into your state that cannot worship and have to pay your minister Because if you were an Anglican, if you were a Baptist or a Quaker, you could not worship. You had to go to their church and pay their ministry, the tip. Okay? And God forbid if you were Catholic, they didn't even know what those were, and then they were just, they didn't know what those were at all. But what I'm saying is, this woman, these two women, were the women, not only for women's rights, but for religious rights in this country, really is imperative, and read the books about them. These are new heroes. This is, I met him, Robert Shaw, he's right here. And if you got a group of kids or a church where you want to go, I'm sure you can go visit his studio, Skylight Studios in Woburn. He's done many in Boston. This happens to be the fire bell. There's the Fireman's Creed. You can turn that. It's another side of it. And it shows their tools and how they risk their life. And this is put up because of the many, many, many firemen in Massachusetts, New England, who have been killed. This is one of the oldest monuments in the United States. It was in front of Beacon Hill. Charles Bulfinch moved it to this side. Charles Bulfinch is the greatest architect in America, the earliest, the first one. He was a genius who later trained, I can't remember, but he, Peter Harris, Peter Alexander. But I just want to say about that monument, it was to the men and women who died in the Revolutionary War. And this was redid right up until 1990. You can go right up to it. He built that State House, the Bulfinch State House. He's the one who built the Capitol, designed the Capitol of the United States of America. So we're talking about genius here. This is the first monument in Doric Hall. We're inside the State House. This is done by Sir Francis Chantrey in the 1800s. He was certainly not an American. He was an aristocrat, sculptor in England. We didn't have the capability. We actually had to go. So what did he do? He put robes on him. The Americans went crazy because they didn't want a monarch or a king, okay, or a senator or a patrician. They wanted a regular guy. So what people ended up saying that this was the blanket that George Washington put on at Valley Forge to get away with it. But it's a beautiful monument, Carrara marble. Next, another one here. Does anybody know what this is? It's Boston Public Gardens. Look at how many are there. You've got to look. They're hidden. There's 16 monuments. Right here alone, people don't realize. Over here, sorry, this one here, on page 80, is it's the 9/11 monument. I never knew there was a 9/11.
Can I say something
Yes.
about that?
Yeah.
After the Bruins parade when they won,
Yes.
I walked all around looking for that, and everybody I asked had no
Right on the
clue
corner.
where
I
it
know.
was.
You would be amazed how many hundreds of people died from not only Boston but from New England. I can't get into it. It was by Victor Walker, but this one here is Edward Everett Hale. You probably remember this from high school. He wrote "A Man Went Out of Country." He was a scholar. He was the president of Harvard. He was a minister. And what's so important about this is done by Bella Pratt, who was, who influenced this other man, Auguste Saint Gaudens, and then Bella Pratt also influenced many other ones that you'll see. This is we have to go back to the other one.
Joe, I have to go fast. I want to get to the woman's monument.
Okay. I just want to say, as far as there's been ministers who bought the book. As a matter of fact, sometimes a lot of schools, the first high school in America, they bought a whole case of books, and I can tell you the reason why they do it. But a lot of ministers bought the books because ministers, you say, well, why is that so important? They're not as maybe as okay, Ether Dome, which is still in the Mass General, okay, because the ether was discovered there in 1846, and it was done by a dentist, not a doctor. So I always tell that to doctor groups. They don't like that.
Sorry, people.
It's
I'm just going to go to the woman's monument.
okay. Listen, Manchester French. Well, can we stop here? Everybody loves this.
Yeah.
This is Robert McCloskey's book, Celebrated, and Nancy Shaw. I met her. She's a great sculptress, and she did the tortoise and the hare for the marathon. What people don't realize, it's in Copley Square. This is Mac, Quack, Lack, Stack, and this is the mother. This is a rare picture because There's usually kids on them. Why did she do this? I spoke to her and everything else. I interviewed her and I got it in the book. To have little kids and families merge together, get involved with these sculptures. So as you can see in the next one, you see what they do. So I didn't know who was doing this, and I was living in Boston. But periodically, they'll do this with the Bruins, the Celtics, Easter Parade, and it's because every time they do it, the team wins. So ironically, they did this, and then they won, and then they did it again, they won. And same way with the Bruins. When you see the Bruins Bobby Orr monument, this is the.
It's also a Mother's Day walk. They do a Mother's Day
absolute,
walk.
a Mother's Day. I was there.
I've
Have
done
you
it.
been there?
Yeah.
On May 11th, on Mother's Day, you've got to go if you're a mother or grandmother with kids or a grandfather. And the real circus thing was, it was really good, is that the parents dress up as the policemen and the mothers as the mother duck, mallard duck, and the kids all dress up as little ducks and they're all walking. And there's hundreds of little ducks. But the best part is the thespians will give the talk and read the McCloskey. But the year that I was there, Mayor Menino did it. You know, the one with the potato in his mouth, the Italian. So what he did, and you couldn't understand a word he said. You know, you couldn't understand a word. A lot of these other monuments, I just showed the woman's monument. Let's go to the woman's monument. I could be here all night. But what do you see that's different than any monuments, a cluster of monuments you've ever seen before in Europe or South America or here? It's very unique. It's done by Meredith Bergman, right in Brookline, and she did this. It's bronze, okay? It's granite. There are stories on each one, okay? This is Lucy Stone. She's the first woman who kept her maiden name, her middle name. Her name was Lucy Stone Blackston, married her husband Blackston. This is Abigail Adams. She was a suffragette fighter. Can you see the way she's positioned like a cat? She would fight every friggin' week up at Beacon Hill against the male, a majority of legislators there fighting for women's rights, women's voting, and anything else. She was the editor of Women's Journal. You probably heard of that, on 9 Park Street, which is now a restaurant. She did this and was one of the, probably, it says here, the first educated woman from Antioch College in Ohio, okay, and brought down here. And she was the first educated woman. She was the precursor to Susan B. Anthony. And they got into it, tuffled together and with their beliefs about women. But she never voted, she died, but Susan B. Anthony did. So don't think the New Yorker girl, this Boston girl has preceded her. This is Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, the second president, and the mother of the sixth president, John Quincy Adams. What's so important about her is her rigidity, her Puritan beliefs, which became Congregationalists, because that's what Congregationalists are. They come from the Puritan, very rigid, very strong. She stood up to people like George Washington, Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson, as well as her husband, John Adams, Henry Knox, and all these other famous people that you know about. She was intelligent. Okay, she educated the first blacks. Okay, young Afro-Americans, and she said, yes, they can be educated. See, people didn't think that they could be. Okay, they thought they were like farm animals, and then same thing with women. So these monuments are milestones, okay, of men's and women's evolvement as human beings. This woman here, again, we already talked about her, is Phyllis Wheatley. She has a pen, and she's contemplating. It's really an ingenious work. Does anybody notice something about special that I did not notice? And this one old golfer guy did, which I was surprised.
They're all life-size?
No, that's good. What else?
You can walk through it.
You can walk through it, and you could read their story. She has a story here, a story here. Okay, here's the deal. These are called plinths. You see this? I told you, they're the granite Pedestals. Women don't need pedestals because they don't have egos like men.
Very good.
So for all the guys in the room, you hate me. All right, let me just go down. Let's see how many. Can I do a few more?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
I can. There's just so much. Go ahead. Just go to the next one. There's a blow, Lucy Stone. Beautiful
Oh,
morning.
wow.
Detail.
Oh, yeah.
Strong. Can you feel her strength?
Comment on that.
Look how stern she is. Look how stern she is.
Wow.
Look how contemplative. Okay, this is a black woman in the 1700s. John Paul Jones was a real figure. You got to read his book by Samuel Eliot Morrison. Even visited her. She was such a incredible person, drawn to her. Of course, he was also a ladies' man, so he was. But that other man, this is important. This has a story in itself. Can you just go back? This, you may not know who this is. I sold a couple of cases of book to the Spanish guy, okay, and he happened to be Argentinian on Newbury Street. I said, why do you buy all my book? He said, well, you got San Domingo, you have Domingo Sarmiento, and he says he's one of our heroes in our country. There's a lot of these heroes, Polish heroes, Irish heroes, in other countries when I go, they know who these people are. So you go into Argentina, you mention this man, they'll love you, okay?
Huh?
Because there's the first president who believed in Horace Mann, remember him, in front of the State House, the educator, the believer and educator, who influenced this man so much that he said we cannot have these dictatorships, these gauchos, these bullies running, killing military. We need an educated public to have a educated democracy and vote. So that's the kind of man. This was given to us as a gift. A gift. It was dropped off over here. Just a couple more that might be. This is a map. This map here. We got to go back. Is showing you where these next ones are. This is the fence. Okay. This is the fence, and these are the monuments in the fence. There's sports figures here. Van Ness Street, Yorkie. Ted Williams is there, the team. This happens to be a very important Irish monument to a lot of people. He was the editor of the Pilot, which is one of the most popular newspapers, Catholic newspaper. And remember, this guy is a god for the Irish American because this man worked from the ground up to get where he was. He was a patriot, and he represents him. And this is the back. This is a Daniel Chester French. Can you go back? Just for a minute. This is Erin, who's the embodiment of a woman like our freedom is for Ireland. That's Ireland. She has two sons that represent this symbolic John Boyle O'Reilly, who is here, poetry, because the Irish are great storytellers, joke tellers, and great literary writers. James Joyce, I can't go into it. Courage, incredible fighters, okay, great courage and strength. So they combine those two. That's the sides in sculpture form. But look at if you can look at the detail and look at the Celtic work and the background. This is a composition that belongs in a museum, but is outside. Good. Just next, this other map is very important because it just happened April 15th, a year ago, right here. Okay, the bombing. And what happened was, a little boy was killed, people were crippled. But in here is the finish line for Copley Place. Copley Place is named after John Copley, who was an artist. The only square, unfortunately, in the United States is named after a artist. Again, this is Nancy Schoen, the tortoise and the hare, based on Aesop's fairy tale, where you have, and I told this to the men's group, I gave a talk a few weeks ago, the geniuses. Don't be like this, because you'll never get anywhere, because the people who work hard and trudge hard plug along. And I tell you, there's no kids that sit on this, it's all adults. But this is a celebration of the longest foot race, a marathon, I think in existence, continuous, and the longest one in the United States. So, and here's where they had the makeshift monument for that bombing. This here is very important. If we look first, go back, This is, of course, by Thomas Ball, who did your George Washington on the equestrian horse in the public gardens, Boston Public Garden. But right next to it is this Emancipation. He's looking down on him, and what he is doing, he's going like a god. A lot of people hate this, because here's the white honor going to this black man. His name is, this was an actual man, Archer Alexander. The Emancipation of Proclamation, he did this, Lincoln did this in the Civil War to free the slaves, so that they could not only free them, but also have them as military combatants, as we saw with the 54th Regiment. Again, this is the newer heroes. I remember this as a kid watching TV, Bobby Orr. This is, you can't see his stick, but you've got to go up to this. Everybody's in front of this taking pictures. It's an elation of triumph, of winning. Just prior to this, a few months before, Mayor Menino and Bailey's wife was there, who got killed in the 9/11 in the plane, was a hockey player, and the entire team, this is a true story, the entire team of the Boston Bruins was there. I think was so inspired. That year, they won after 42 years. I don't know, maybe it's a coincidence. But these monuments instill something, okay? And there's no colors, there's just one color. The genius of this, okay, is not only the shapes, but any of these monuments you look at, if you look at a Michelangelo, a Bernini, a Giovanni of Bologna in Italy, or the American sculptors, is these crevices, these creases, these folds that actually give shading and life and emotion to these. Next. We'll go. It's done by Harry Weber, who just did Little Tony DeMarco, the lightweight champion of the world. You know anybody who this is? This is look at him. This is done by Pablo Eduardo, a Spaniard, and it's a modern. If you've ever gone to Spain or Barcelona, it's that ripple effect. He's moving. Where's he moving? If you look at the entire piece of his 16 years, this great Irishman leader, okay, brought Boston up to the new age, okay? This is Red Auerbach, a Jewish kid, good basketball player from New Jersey who became a Bostonian. The winningest coach in the world of any sport, I think up until a year ago. Right next door, Bill Rogers, I remember him. They bought cases of books, him and his brother. And those are his actual shoes. How do I know that? Because nobody knows who did this. So I asked Bob Shaw who did it. He says, I did it. I said, why didn't you put your name on it? Because I did not create it. I said, what do you know? He says, well, you know when you get little kids' shoes and you bronze them? That's what I did with those and Larry Bird's shoes. But if you look at this, if you go back, just for a second, he won 3 in a row. Okay, here's a Bostonian guy, you know, Brahmin here, a family, and then he won again. Okay, I call it the Kenya Classic now. Up until this year, okay, we had an American just win this. Okay, just win this. And I wonder if it was an inspiration because of what happened the year before. Because don't forget, what happened the year before was not just the bombing. That was an assault, okay, not on that poor little boy and all those women and guys who were deformed, but that was an assault on every American's right and freedom to assemble. That's why Mayor Menino, as crippled as he is, went up, and every other person went up to that line, because when you attack, you want to attack somebody, okay, financial power, you go to New York and you destroy a building. When you want to come and affront America's rights, where they started here with life and death, as well as intellectuality, you come to Boston, and when you do that, you pay the price of all hell, because that's the way Boston is. Read these books on the riots in Boston and how Bostonians respond, okay, to any attempt on their freedoms, whether it's religious freedom, having the ability for guns, to possess guns, to protect themselves against their government, as well as outside forces, and also their political beliefs and their freedom of speech and their freedom of assembly. These are sacred. One more? There's so much to say on each one of these. Just one more, and that'll be. I'll stop because there's
No,
a few more.
I'll just go by quickly.
Okay, this here is
You don't have to tell
this
us.
is this here. You gotta stop. This is for just to give you an idea of the kind of town this is. This is a famous Aspiration of Liberty by Holocene. He's Hungarian. If you know any Hungarians, they came over, I think it was 1954, 1956. They was running, like the Mexicans are running from their country because they're being persecuted by the communists. This shows they crushed the communists. His father was fighting, the mother, and then finally the next generation of a child. This is like a via contorti. It's an Italian type of twisting and turning, spiral upward in a positive direction, and it's in Liberty Square. Do you know what happened on Liberty Square?
No.
Liberty Square in 1767, real briefly, was the Stamp Act. Sam Adams stood here with a big mob and stopped the Stamp Act. This is a monument upon a monument. That's how deep this city is. You go into Rome, there are layers and layers of monuments. And
I'm
just
gonna
finish up.
quickly go through.
This is a real good one for kids. There's about 100 little monuments. It's called Boston Bricks. It's in downtown Boston. One little alley. It's called Winthrop's Lane, and it's a depiction of a summary of all we've been talking about. Underground Railroad. The first telephone is the date. Boston first school, public school. Boston Monster Drive is that's what we turn into when we drive them. And then there's the Stamp Act, see, 1765, and that's Liberty Square. First subway in the United States, not in New York City. First one is in London. Paul Revere, my hero, and the reason is because he's a little business guy like me. He had 14 kids. I didn't have 14 kids, but he was a Mason. He was a dentist. He was what people don't realize. He was a spy. I got to tell him this.
No, let's go.
All right, and then this here. That's one. This is George Washington. I think probably one of the first sculptures in the United States done by a Danish American on Hanover Street. So I believe
No,
my
that's in
hypothesis.
the
I haven't proved it yet, but it's in. You can see this right in Old North Church, right near the altar on the left. And that was given as a gift in 1815 by Schubel, who was one of the big. This is Christian Gollinger who did it. The next one is, this is a plaque where you can see me in here taking the picture. It's one of those Dutch things, you know, they put their reflection. Lafayette was standing there in 1824, 50 years later, saying, this is the man I knew. He stood right there, Marquis de Lafayette, the hero of heroes. The Americans worshipped him. He was probably the second most worshipped, other than George Washington. And here's one of my fans. This little girl is standing in a fountain that her father put her in. This is, I told you the other book. Well, this is another book, The Jungle Book. This is Bagheera, and it's a children's book. What he does with my book is take that book and take his daughter around to teach her how to read, and she goes to each monument, and he reads a book from that monument. So, and there's me, you know, being funny. So, kind of like blending in with Abigail. Very strange. Yeah.
She's not happy.
Yeah, so I'm trying to lighten it up, you know, get the bow tie on. I try to lighten it up, put a little intellectuality. Sorry we had a rush, but any questions, I'm here. Oh, I got the books. They're reduced to $10. If you have a credit card, you want to buy a dozen or a box, I don't care, because we've got a credit card, we got that square. You take cash, check, that's all. That's all I can, any questions at all?
Awesome job.
You like that?
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot more. Plenty to see out there.
Dave.
Okay.